Welcome back to stage 4 of the Mirage GT build video series. In this video, we're going to be fitting the dashboard and instruments. This includes fitting the dashboard clocks, gauges and switches, the inner dashboard loom, the front interior audio speakers, the radio console, and the footwell panel. As usual, a full list of the torque settings for this video can be found on our website, using the link in the description below. Now that our build has received its full body preparation, paint and interior trim, we're now ready to move on to fitting the dashboard and dashboard instruments. We're going to begin by fitting the dashboard instruments to the dashboard prior to fitting the assembled dashboard itself. We're going to start by removing the thumb screws, washers and backplate from our analog clock, which can then be moved into position into the first of the pre-cut holes on our dashboard. It's important to make sure that your workspace area is clean and tidy, as this will help to prevent any damage to the dashboard trim when repositioning the dashboard during the installation of these instruments. This first clock can now be secured to the dashboard by refitting the backplate, washers and thumb screws. With our analog clock now in place, we can now repeat this process for the fuel gauge, voltmeter and water temperature gauge. Next up is the oil pressure gauge, which we'll be installing in the center of our primary driver's instrument cluster. With the oil pressure gauge now in place, we can now once again repeat this process to fit the tacho and speedo, before connecting these instruments to their respective cabling. The tacho and speedo cabling both come with a pre-fitted function button, which we can now fit to the underside of the dashboard unit. We're now ready to move on to fitting our switches, starting with the hazard switch, which sits to the right of the speedo on our right-hand drive dashboard, or left of the tacho on our left-hand drive dashboard. The red rear fog warning light can now be fitted beneath the speedo, with the yellow front fog warning light fitted beneath the tacho. You may notice that 3 of our remaining 4 switches have a standard on-off motion, whilst the 4th switch has a momentary on motion. This momentary switch will be used to activate the screen wash, and once we've removed the pre-fitted panel nut, we can now fit this switch into position through the back of the dashboard before securing it in place. When fitting the remaining 3 switches, be sure to position these with the off position at the top of the switch. In no particular order, these 3 identical on-off switches can now be fitted into position on the dashboard and secured in place using the panel nuts provided. These 3 switches will be used to control the interior light and front and rear fog lights. Next up is the ignition switch, which sits in between the water temperature gauge and tacho on our right-hand drive dashboard. The final 3 switches to be fitted to our dashboard control the fan, wipers and lights. As with our previous switches, these will be fitted from the rear of the dashboard and secured using the panel nuts provided. With all of our clocks and switches now in position on the dashboard, we're now going to connect them up to the inner dashboard loom. Each of the plugs on our inner dashboard loom have been labelled according to their destination, and we can now connect each of these plugs up to the corresponding cables of our dashboard switches and gauges. Once all of the dashboard components have been connected to the inner dashboard loom, we're going to secure the loom in place using a selection of cable ties, which will help to keep all of our cables secure and tidy. Before we fit the newly assembled dashboard into position on our chassis, we're going to go ahead and install the front audio speakers. We start by moving each speaker and bracket into position in the front footwells and connecting up the two terminals to the speaker wires in the wiring loom. Be sure to connect the larger of these two cables to the large speaker terminal and repeat this process for the smaller cable and terminal. Once connected, the speaker and bracket can now be secured using the 4 screws provided before clipping the outer speaker cover into place. This process can be repeated for both speakers, in both the driver's and passenger's footwells. Next up, we're going to fit the radio console. We start by moving the radio into position through the pre-cut section of the radio console aperture. Once in position, we can now secure the radio to the interior bracket using the bolts provided. Next up are the heated seat switches, which will be moving into position on both sides of the aperture. If your build does not have heated seats, this step can be skipped. The air conditioning switch will be fitted on the driver's side of the console, with the green light positioned facing downwards. The heater control valve will also be fitted on the driver's side of the console. Finally, the USB and 12-volt charging points can now be fitted on the passenger side of the console. With the radio console now assembled, we can now move it into position and secure it in place using the 2 bolts provided. Once in place, we can now connect the radio console and switches to the corresponding sections of the wiring loom. With the charging ports, air conditioning and heated seats switches now connected to the wiring loom, we're going to connect up the cooling system control valve by drilling a hole through the chassis bulkhead and feeding the cable through into the engine bay. This can now be connected up to the heater valve using the clip provided. In the final stage of this video, prior to fitting the dashboard itself, we're going to fit the 3 sections of air ducting. These include one large diameter 160cm section and 2 smaller 45cm and 120cm sections of ducting. Starting on the right hand side of the underside dashboard plenum, we're going to secure the smaller diameter 120cm section of ducting in place with the cable tie provided. This process can be repeated using the 45cm section on the left hand side of the underside dashboard plenum. The large diameter 160cm section will be connected to the rear of the vent in the driver's footwell and fed over the steering column before being connected up to the right hand heater outlet in the passenger's footwell. We'll be using some additional cable ties here to secure this section of ducting in place along the bulkhead, which will help to keep the ducting secure. We're now ready to carefully move the dashboard back into position on our build. It's advisable to attach one bolt to each side of the dashboard loosely at first, whilst we move the dashboard into position and ensure that all cabling and ducting have been fed through correctly. Once we're happy with the position of the dashboard, we can now once again secure it in place using the bolts provided. With the dashboard now in place, we can now connect the 3 electrical connections of the inner dashboard loom to the main wiring loom and secure the remaining sections of ducting to the heater outlets in the passenger's footwell using the cable ties provided. With all of the ducting now secure, we can now move the footwell panel into position in the passenger footwell and secure it in place using the 2 screws provided. This completes the installation of the dashboard and dashboard instruments, and we can now move on to the next video.